"This is not my doing," said Holly's crane, with 200 people watching him, and set the gold cup back down on the table. "I never went into that water. I have never in my life been able to swim." The Duke of Umberleigh stood at the head of his own tenants' dinner, with his hand still out, and the silence came down the long barn like a shutter. 12 months to the day. 12 months since his sister had gone into the weir in March with the flood up and the sluice open, and been pulled out on the far bank, and lived. 12 months since a young gentleman had come dripping up the meadow with Perdita in his arms, and laid her at the Duke's feet on the gravel. And the Duke of Umberleigh, who had never been afraid of anything before that afternoon, and had been afraid of a great many things since, had said, in front of witnesses, that whatever it was in his gift, Mr. Crane had only to name it. Mr. Crane had named it. He had wanted his family raised, and the Duke had raised them, a lease on favorable terms, a presentation to a living for the second brother, the Cranes at Umberleigh's table every week of the season. And then, because gratitude of that magnitude has a way of looking for the largest possible expression, the Duke had offered the largest thing he had. He had offered himself. In 6 weeks' time he was to marry Miss Arabella Crane, whom he did not love and did not dislike, and the east wing had been re-roofed for her, and the settlements were signed, and there was a tablet of white marble already set into the wall of the Weir house, with an inscription in it that had cost him a great deal of thought. "Say that again," said the Duke. Crane's face was the color of tallow. He was 26 years old, and he had held out for a year, and something in him had given way at the sight of the cup. "I cannot take it, your grace. I have taken everything else, and I find I cannot take a cup with an inscription on it." He gripped the table. "I came down the meadow because I heard shouting. When I reached the bank, Lady Perdita was already out of the water. She was lying in the reeds at the sluice gate, and there was a woman kneeling over her, working her arms, and the woman said to me, 'Take her up, sir, take her up to the house. I cannot carry her.' So I took her up. That is the whole of what I did. I carried a young lady 200 yards across a level meadow, and for that I have had a lease and a living for my brother, and your sister's thanks every Sunday, and now," his voice cracked, "and now a marriage. I let it stand because nobody asked me a direct question, and every month it grew harder to say and easier not to, and I have not slept properly since Candlemas. This is not my doing. It never was." The Duke of Umberleigh did not move for some time. He was aware of 200 faces, of his sister rising white-faced from her seat halfway down the table, of Arabella Crane's fan stopped in midair. He was aware, chiefly and coldly, of the marble tablet in the wall of the Weir house, on which was cut a name that had no business being there. "Who was the woman?" he said. "I do not know, your grace. A servant, gray gown, apron. I did not look at her face." Crane put a hand over his eyes. "I have tried for a year to remember her face." The Duke went to the weir that night with a lantern. The flood was down, the water ran black and low over the sill, and the sluice gate stood as it had stood, and the marble tablet was very white in the lantern light. He read the inscription he had composed. Then he set the lantern on the stone, and stood with his hands on the rail, and understood that for 12 months he had been thanking the wrong person with such thoroughness that he had almost married her brother's sister for it, and that somewhere within a mile of where he stood there was a woman who had gone into a March flood after a stranger, and had not received so much as a word. He began at 8 the next morning, and he did not stop. Perdita first. She sat with her hands in her lap in the yellow room and tried, and it was clear that a great deal of that afternoon was gone out of her for good. "I remember the cold," she said. "I remember thinking the noise was very loud, and then that it had stopped. And then hands. Ambrose, she had freezing hands, and she was singing." "Singing?" not properly, saying more than singing, over and over like a person counting. Perdita's brow drew, something about a hen and a market, and she smelled of starch and lavender. I have smelled it since, I know I have smelled it since in this house, and I have never once thought to ask why. The laundry, then, starch and lavender. Mrs. Tarn, the housekeeper, was in the still room, and Mrs. Tarn had been housekeeper at Umberleigh for 19 years, and she was a competent, rigid, unimaginative woman, whom the Duke had never had cause to think about at all. "You will fetch me the household books," he said, "for March of last year." "Your Grace, the books." "All of them, the wages, the stoppages, and the laundry list." They were brought. He read them at the still-room table with the copper pans hanging over his head, and it took him 19 minutes to find it, and when he found it, he read it 4 times. Under stoppages, for the quarter ending Lady Day, in Mrs. Tarn's small upright hand. Quill S. Under laundrymaid 1 gray stuff gown and 1 apron, spoiled beyond use, also absent from her work 3 hours without leave. Stopped from wages, 4 shillings and 6pence. "Mrs. Tarn," said the Duke of Umberleigh, in a voice that brought the still-room maid's head up in fright, "explain this to me." "It is the ordinary practice, your Grace. A servant who ruins her own gown." "On what day?" Mrs. Tarn's mouth worked. "I do not recall the day." "You recall it perfectly. It was the 11th of March. My sister went into the weir at 4 in the afternoon on the 11th of March, and at some hour that evening an under laundrymaid came in with a ruined gown and 3 hours to account for, and you find her 4 and 6pence. He set the book down flat. "Did she tell you what she had been doing?" The silence went on so long that the still-room maid began to cry. "She did," said Mrs. Tarn at last. "She came to me that night and said she had pulled Lady Perdita out of the water and that the gentleman had carried her up. I told her not to be a wicked, forward, lying girl. Your Grace, a laundrymaid claiming a thing like that, when there was a gentleman of family already thanked in front of the whole house. I thought she was making a story to get herself noticed. Servants do. I told her that if I heard one word of it again, she would be turned off without a character. And I told her to be grateful. I did not turn her off that night for the gown." The Duke of Umberleigh discovered that his hands were flat on the table, and that he had to keep them there. "And she never said it again." "Not once, your Grace." Mrs. Tarn had begun, finally, to look frightened. "She was a good worker, quiet. She stopped at Umberleigh another 8 months, and then she gave notice at Michaelmas and went." "Went where?" "She did not say. There was no need for her to say." A hesitation. "She asked for a character. I gave her one. I wrote that she was honest and industrious, and that she had a tendency to imagine things." The Duke stood up. He looked at the woman who had run his house for 19 years, and found that he could not trust himself to speak for the space of 5 heartbeats. "You will be gone by Friday," he said. "You will have your wages to the day and no character at all, because I find I have no talent for writing one that is both kind and true. And you will thank whatever you pray to that I am a man who does not raise his voice, madam, because there is nothing in me at this moment that is not shouting." It took him 11 days to find her. He went himself, which caused a good deal of comment. The Duke of Umberleigh in a plain coat with 1 groom, asking at registry offices, at laundries, at the great bleach fields north of Marchford, where the linen lay out white on the grass for half a mile. He had a name and a description and a smell of lavender, and he had in his breast pocket a page torn out of his own household book with 4 shillings and 6pence written on it in a rigid upright hand. He found Selina Quill on the 11th day, in a wash-house behind an inn at Catterley, with her sleeves rolled to the elbow and her arms in a copper to the shoulder, in a room so full of steam that he could not see the far wall. She straightened up and looked at him, and he saw her recognize him, and he saw her go white, and he saw her decide, visibly, in the space of a breath, to say nothing whatever. "Miss Quill," said the Duke of Umberleigh, and took his hat off in a wash-house. "My name is Ambrose Hale. I am the Duke of Umberleigh, and I have come 2 days' journey to ask your pardon." She would not sit down. The innkeeper's wife had given them the parlor in a flutter and had built up the fire, and Selina Quill stood by the door with her red arms wrapped in her apron and would not sit down. "You should not be here, your grace." "That has been said to me a great deal this fortnight, and I find it has never once been a reason." He remained standing too, since she would not sit. "Mr. Crane has told the truth at last, before 200 people. My sister remembers cold hands and a woman saying something about a hen and a market." Selina Quill shut her eyes. "It is a rhyme," she said. "My mother's. You say it to keep a rhythm when you are working somebody's arms. My mother laid out the drowned at Catterley Reach for 11 years, and she taught me to do it before I was 9 years old. There is no cleverness in it. You put them on their side, you get the water out, you work the arms, and you keep saying the words till the breath catches, and if it does not catch by the end of the 4th time, you stop." Her voice went unsteady. It caught the 3rd time. "She was sick on my apron, and I have never in my life been so glad of anything." "And you came back to my house," said the Duke, "and were called a liar and fined 4 and 6pence. "It was the gown, your grace. The gown was ruined that was fair." Miss Quill and Mrs. Tarn was not a wicked woman. She only could not fit it into her head. Miss Quill. He took the folded page out of his breast pocket and held it out, and she looked at it and did not take it. "I have read this line perhaps 200 times in 11 days. I am the master of that house. Those are my books, kept in my name, on my authority. My sister was breathing that night because you knelt in a flood drain and counted, and by 9 o'clock the same evening my household had docked your wages for the dress you did it in, and I signed the quarter's accounts myself in June without once looking to see what was in them." He put the page on the table. "I did not know. That is not a defense. It is only the shape of the failure." She was crying, quietly and furiously, the way a person cries who has taught herself not to. "I did try," she said. "Once. That was all the trying I had. I had a place and £11 a year and a mother at Catterley with a bad chest, and Mrs. Tarn said without a character. And after that I let it alone. I have let it alone for a year, and I have been all right, and then you come into my wash-house with your hat in your hand and undo the whole of it." "Yes," said the Duke of Umberleigh. "I am sorry for that also. I could not think of a way to mend a thing without touching it." She wiped her face with the inside of her wrist. "Well, you have said your pardon. You may go home now. There are 3 other matters, and then I will go if you tell me to." "Say them, then." "The first is money. Not 4 and 6pence. It was never 4 and 6pence. There is an annuity of £200 settled on you as of Tuesday, and it is done, and it is irrevocable, and you may burn the papers and it will still be paid, so you may as well not waste the fire. Your mother's rent at Catterley is paid to the end of her life, and a physician goes to her on Thursdays." Selina Quill sat down at last, rather suddenly, on the edge of a chair. "The second is the tablet at the weir. It has been taken out of the wall. There is a new one being cut, and I have brought the wording for you to approve or refuse, because it is your name that goes on it, and no one has yet asked your leave for anything." He set the paper beside the first. "The third is my betrothal. It is at an end. Miss Crane and I released one another on Monday with perfect goodwill, and I believe she was more relieved than I was, which is saying something considerable." Your Grace, that is the whole of the business, said the Duke. Every part of it was owed. None of it was a favor, and none of it requires you to say one grateful word to me, and if you never see Umberleigh again the payments will follow you all your life. He turned his hat over once in his hands. And now, having settled the debt entirely, I should like to be permitted to come back in a month and ask you something that has nothing at all to do with it. She stared at him. You cannot mean that. I mean it exactly. I am a laundrymaid, look at my hands. She held them out scalded, cracked, the nails gone to nothing. You are a duke, and I am a woman with hands like that. I have looked at nothing else since I came in, said the Duke of Umberleigh. Miss Quill, I have spent a year being grateful to the wrong man, and I know exactly what gratitude feels like, and I promise you upon my honor that this is a different article altogether. Gratitude was a lease and a living, and a cup with an inscription. This is a man who has ridden 400 miles in 11 days, and has been unable in all that time to stop thinking about a woman who went into a March flood for a stranger, and then went back to work and was fined for it, and said nothing for a year, out of a courage so ordinary that nobody in my house even noticed it was there. He put his hat on. A month. If the answer is no, it will be no, and the annuity stands, and you will never see me again. But I should like to be allowed to ask. He came back in a month. He came back the month after that, and the month after that, and by the fourth he had given up pretending it was a business call and brought his sister, who wept on Selina's neck in the inn parlor and would not let go of her hand all afternoon. The county said everything the county could be expected to say. He was told, variously, that he was mad, that he was infatuated, that he would be laughed at in London, and that his father would have turned in his vault. And to all of it the Duke of Umberleigh said that a man who had put a false name in marble had used up his allowance of caring what was said, and would they take another glass of wine? He asked her at Catterley in the churchyard, at her mother's gate, on a wet Tuesday in November. You will be asked all your life how it came about, he said. There is no help for that. They will always tell the story of the weir. Then they may tell it, said Selina Quill, so long as you know I am not marrying you because of the weir. Why then? She considered him for a long moment, standing there with rain on his shoulders and his hat, once again, in his hands. Because you came into a wash-house, she said, and took your hat off to me before you knew whether I could be useful to you. Nobody has ever done that, not once in 23 years. They were married at Catterley in the spring, quietly, with her mother in the front pew wrapped in 3 shawls, and Perdita as the only bridesmaid, and Holly's Crane in the 3rd row, who had asked to come and had been told he might, and who cried harder than anybody, and who afterwards went abroad with the Duke's letters of introduction in his pocket, and did well in the end. A new tablet went into the wall of the weir house that summer. The Duchess of Umberleigh chose the wording herself and struck out 4 of the 6 lines her husband had composed, on the grounds that they were too fine for what had happened, and what went in at last was this: that on the 11th of March, in the flood, Selina Quill of Catterley, then under laundrymaid at this house, drew Lady Perdita Hale living from the sluice, and was not thanked for 11 months, and that the fault was the house's and not hers. The Duke read it aloud at the unveiling to about 100 people, and got to the last clause and could not finish it, and his wife finished it for him. She would never let the 4 and 6pence be repaid. He offered it a dozen times, as a joke and then not as a joke, and she refused every time. And one wet evening in their 40th year together, he went looking in her workbox for a length of tape, and found the coins there instead 4 shillings and 6pence, in the money of that year, wrapped up in the torn page out of a household book, kept all that while. He sat down on the end of the bed with them in his hand, and she came in and found him there, and neither of them said anything for a while. "You kept it," he said at last. "Of course I kept it." His wife took the coins out of his palm and folded the page around them again and put them back where they lived. "It is the price of a gray gown and an apron, Ambrose, and there is not a jewel in this house I would take for it, because the day I paid it I saved a girl's life, and the day you came to find out who had paid it, you took your hat off in a wash house." She closed the lid of the workbox. "Now come down to dinner. Perdita's grandchildren are in the hall, and one of them has got into the orangery again." The Duke of Umberleigh came down to dinner. He was 71 years old, and his wife's hand was on his arm, and he still could not go past the weir on the Letter Road without taking his hat off, and everybody in that country knew why, and nobody ever thought it strange.